What is a minority attack in chess? Is it when you use all your minor pieces combined to try to overcome a rook or a queen? Unfortunately, that's not the case, but if you want to figure it out, in today's chess video, I'll be explaining what a minority attack is, coming straight after the intro. So what is a minority attack after all? A minority attack is actually quite simple. It's when you have less pawns on one side and you try to use the pawns where you have less pawns to win the more pawns that your opponent has on that side. So let's say your opponent has 4 pawns and you have 2 pawns. If you can use your pieces and the 2 pawns to sacrifice themselves to win those 4 pawns, you have been successful in a minority attack. Still don't understand what I mean? I'll be showing you it in this example over here. This position in front of us is a clear example of a minority attack. So what do I mean? In this position, you can see that white has 2 pawns over here, while black has 3 pawns over here, which means we're going to try to use these 2 pawns to help us win a couple pawns on this side. Now, how do we do this? In this position, there's a couple moves you can really think about, but what I really like in this position is this a4 move preparing pawn b5. Now, in this position, let us see what our opponent can do. Let's assume our opponent does something useless, like king h8, alright? Our opponents probably won't be playing king h8 in their own games because king h8 looks kind of silly, and it is kind of silly. But let's say he does, and then we play this pawn b5 move. This pawn b5 move is a pawn break, and you probably learned about pawn breaks in one of my previous videos. Now, what does pawn b5 do? It basically does a couple things. So, in this position, black has 3 options he can do. He can capture, he could stay still and do nothing, or he can push. Obviously, pushing is very silly, as that just gives us a free pawn right away, and our minority attack has already succeeded. So the other 2 options are much more likely. He captures or stays still. So let's say our opponent plays king g8, alright? This allows us to capture this pawn, and if he captures back with the pawn or rook, then guess what? He will have a weakness on c6. If he captures with the rook, then we could just capture here, capture, and now he still has a weakness on c6. But let's say he doesn't. Let's say he takes with a pawn, and now we have a very big advantage here as white because now we have a weakness we can attack. The purpose of a minority attack is to allow us to create weaknesses in our opponent's position. And in this position, we open up this b file, but more importantly, we open up the semi-open c file that our rook can now attack. If our pawns stayed on b4 and a3, sure, they would have looked nice. But then the problem is our opponent's pawns would have looked nice too. That b pawn would have defended c6, and there was no way our rooks would break through. This is the strength of a minority attack. You can open up semi-open files. So what is the plan from here? It's actually quite simple. We can play rook c3 to double up rooks. It's a move I would probably play rook c2 because rook c3 allows knight e4 with tempo. But I'll probably play rook c2. Let's say our opponent decides to double up on his side as well. Then we bring our second rook into the game. And now we have 2 rooks attacking this rook and 2 rooks defending this pawn over here. Now, obviously, the one attacking in chess usually has an advantage because look how active the white rooks are compared to the black rooks. They're stuck. They can't do much, which means white will already have a huge advantage here. In fact, we can already move this move bishop b5 if we really want to, with the idea of just taking on c6, but the very obvious bishop a6 chasing the defender away, winning the pawn, is what we want to really do when we have a minority attack. As you guys can see, we won the pawn, and now not only that, our pawn chain on the king side is still superior compared to black. This is one very nice pawn chain we have over here. And this d5 will become weak because it doesn't have an e6 pawn defending it. And now this a pawn can become a target for us to attack as well. This is the strength of a minority attack. Now, let's say instead of that, let's say he does, let's say instead of doing nothing, he decides to capture us. If he captures, we capture back with the a pawn, and guess what? We still have another huge weakness that we can attack. As you guys can see, there's a pattern here. The purpose of minority attacks and why they're so strong is you can trade off one set of pawn so that there can be a semi-open file that your rooks can use to attack your opponent's pawns. In this position, look, I'm going to attack your a7 pawn over here. So let's say he decides to defend. Rook a8, he defends the pawn. Then guess what? We're doing the very simple double up again. So he cannot play a6 or a5 because of en passant, capture, 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 and we win the pawn with the d5 as a weakness, and being up a pawn should be enough for us to win to promote a pawn in the future. So how does he defend this pawn? It's actually super difficult. It's actually impossible. So the best move here for black is actually to sacrifice the pawn. And this is the strength. We have space when we have a minority attack, and we can also make sure that we can win a pawn. Now, there's one thing you guys need to know and something very important for you to know. Never trade all your pieces when you're using a minority attack. If you trade off all the pieces, and when I say pieces, I mean knight, bishop, rook, and rook. So let's say I was able to just magically make them disappear. Poof, poof, disappear, 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 disappear. Oh, disappear, 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 disappear. And let's put this pawn back. In these positions, black often can get an advantage. Now in this position, it's still better for white slightly, but it leads to some complications because black can go for, guess what? He can go for an outside pass pawn. And usually these are winning for the side with the outside pass pawn, which means you need to be a little bit careful about those. Now, in the following week, I'll be teaching you guys more about majority attacks and what to do if you're on the side of a minority attack and what you guys can do so it's not utterly doomed as it was in black's position. I'll give you a clue. Usually keeping queens will help you because black's attack usually is very strong. Do you have any questions about minority attacks or any burning questions that you guys have about chess? If you guys do, make sure to tell me in the comment section below as I would be happy to make a video to help you guys answer. Also, check out that video over there for more exciting chess content.